Employers usually spend a long time in deciding whether or not to give you a settlement agreement, so you should also spend more than 10 minutes to read this. Now you know what you're giving up by signing, as in waiving which rights. Let's have a look at the document, what it actually contains. Confidentiality clauses within settlement agreements, in a nutshell, are clauses which prevent an employee going away and talking about what has taken place and how this settlement has come about. Usually in this confidentiality clause, there is one component missing, and that is that the employer should also be bound by this clause. So sometimes I have to go back and say to the employer, can you make sure that you also retain confidentiality? Because sometimes both parties, sometimes employers forget that this should be a mutual obligation rather than just an obligation on the side of the employee. Because there are people within workplaces who will go off and talk about the exit of somebody when they shouldn't. Therefore, there are many, many ways of dealing with confidentiality. Now, the other thing with confidentiality, which is very important, is so you normally get a clause where it will say the word, you should not make disparaging statements, which means do not go off slagging off the employer, basically. So it doesn't mean that you then pick up the phone and say to the newspaper, hello, I've left and I've been paid off because they did not want me to bring a claim for unfair dismissal and they paid me £50,000. That is terrible. Do not do this. Whatever you do, if you sign a settlement agreement, that's a big no, okay? Do not go off and make disparaging statements. Similarly, the employer should not do the same in any referencing as well. One key clause that you must remember is going to give you an ongoing obligation is usually something which is required by law. So for example, if you work in the financial sector, and this has happened, and I've seen this in settlement agreements very often. So if you are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, for example, in the settlement agreement, it may say that everything is confidential. You cannot talk about this. However, if a body such as the Financial Conduct Authority investigates us in the future and something needs to be discussed with them, then you may be obliged to talk to them. And the rights that you then waive will be that you cannot sue them for different things such as discrimination, unfair dismissal, victimization, harassment. There's a whole list of them. And usually this can be summarized in even a page or can go on for, I've seen it in agreements where it can be a number of pages. So just be very mindful of the confidentiality clause, because that is so important to understand that once you've signed it, that's it. You cannot go and talk about this. So the confidentiality clause sometimes, not always, sometimes has an exception where you are able to talk to your spouse or somebody like that, because some settlement agreements are quite compassionate actually, where they accept that you may need to let off your steam somewhere. Some of the restrictions that can be placed also are that you cannot go work for a competitor at least within the first 6 months of your period of termination, if you like. So there are certain clauses where these can be a problem whilst on garden leave. So I've had situations where somebody has come to me and said, I have been offered another job and I'm also offered a settlement agreement. I've not had a good time here. I've had enough. However, the new job is offering me a better package, but also some of the clients from the previous job still want me. So I want to carry those clients over effectively. So this could be from any industry. What the employer sometimes does is they will say that you cannot take any business from our business effectively. And if you do, then we will sue you. Now, in this modern age of client confidentiality that we live in, there are difficulties in finding out where clients go because they're not obliged to tell you either. But if your ex-employer gets wind of the fact that you took clients, and in your restrictive covenants clauses, if one of those clauses was that you cannot do this or take clients to your new place or whatever, then you may have a problem. So that you do need to seek legal advice on. And I've had to advise many people on this over the years. In the settlement agreement, there will be clauses where it will state termination of employment, and usually that lists out a general clause about when your termination will take place and who it takes place between. So these are general clauses, and then after that clause you will also see a clause which is usually an obligations clause on behalf of the employer, where they endeavour to carry out all of the duties that they should be carrying out up until that point of the termination. So for example, it might be that they are going to pay you your salary, which is obviously your entitlement until the end. They're also going to allow you to have certain benefits, which might be healthcare, for example. They endeavour to carry out their obligations. There is usually an expenses clause depending on what you did. So for example, if you had a company car, which you then may be obliged to return unless you buy it, because that might be part of the negotiation, or there may be expenses for petrol you need to submit, or just anything, meal tickets that you've not claimed for. So all of this should really be part of the agreement, so everything is concluded satisfactorily by the time that the agreement is dealt with. It's always important to note that one of the key clauses is returning company property. A lot of people seem to think that if they're not asked, we can just keep it. I always say it's better to return electronic devices, gadgets. For example, you may have been given a laptop, and you may have been given a company phone and they've forgotten to ask you for it. I think it's better to just be upfront and say, look, I was given this and I don't know who to return this to. There are situations where people have tried to return things and the employer has said, okay, we'll get back to you, or something's just gone into abeyance, the discussions have lapsed and people end up with these sorts of items which really should have been returned. However, the general rule is you should always return your company property. Mutual obligations are usually that both parties will not make representations to any person which could suggest that the employee continues to remain employed as well. You must not make representations to anybody. Now, one of the biggest things I've seen also is when people have not taken off the fact that they work at this workplace. So for example, LinkedIn is a very good platform for professionals, but sometimes people forget to remove the fact they are not working somewhere and a settlement agreement has taken place, and they have just simply forgotten. Not a very big deal if they've simply forgotten, but if they deliberately left it on there, then that can be an issue. And it also depends on how bad or good the terms were that you left on. And if the terms were really bad and the employer really does not like you, or you had a really bad time with the employer, it's better to just take off the fact that you do not work there anymore straight away. Usually a settlement agreement is an agreement which comes about because there is no admission of liability by the employer on any potential claims that could be brought against them. So you are accepting the fact that you will not be able to sue them on anything, and they are also saying, well, we are not admitting to anything either. There have been situations where incidents have taken place where the employer does know that discrimination has taken place, but they are not admitting that, and they are saying, right, we're going to pay you X amount of money, and that is it. We're calling it a day between us. If a settlement agreement has become a point of discussion for you, and if you are an employee or an employer, please come and talk to me in the free 15-minute sessions. You can self-book these on my website, www.thedirectaccessbarrister.com. I am Haresh Sood, and this is Pancho.